At my mother's wedding, she called me ungrateful for not celebrating her new husband. The ballroom at the Grand Plaza Hotel in downtown Boston was immaculate crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements in deep burgundy and gold. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, punctuated by the soft melody from a string quartet that probably cost more than my semester's tuition. Champagne flowed freely, clinking glasses and polite laughter providing the soundtrack to what was supposed to be the celebration of the year. Everything about this wedding screamed excess, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the imported silk tablecloths that draped elegantly over each table. It was nauseating. I sat rigid in my chair, my wine glass untouched, my plate of gourmet food barely disturbed. The entire scene felt like a mockery of everything I held sacred. "You haven't eaten anything," my brother Ethan whispered, his fingers nervously adjusting his tie. He looked uncomfortably formal in his tailored suit, so different from his usual worn jeans and graphic tees. I shrugged, my eyes fixed on my mother, Eleanor Matthews, resplendent in her cream designer gown, her arm wrapped around her new husband's waist. Gregory Wilson, successful corporate attorney, country club member, and the man who had been in my mother's life long before my father's heart had stopped beating. The sight made my stomach turn. "Not hungry," I replied, finally taking a sip of the expensive red wine that tasted like ash in my mouth. Ethan's eyes followed my gaze. "Try not to make a scene, Sophie," he murmured, though I could hear the conflict in his voice. He was torn too, we both were, but he had always been better at hiding his emotions, at playing along. "I wasn't planning to," I said, though the anger simmering beneath my skin suggested otherwise. I hadn't planned on attending this farce of a wedding. When the invitation arrived, thick creamy cardstock embossed with gold lettering, I had immediately tossed it into my apartment's recycling bin. I wanted nothing to do with this celebration of betrayal. But then Ethan had called, his voice uncharacteristically fragile. "Sophie, please," he had begged over the phone. "I know how you feel about this, believe me, I do, but I can't face them alone. I need you there." And just like that, I found myself on a flight from Chicago to Boston, trading my comfortable life as a museum curator for this charade of happiness that made my insides twist with rage. The worst part was watching everyone fawn over my mother and Gregory. To them, Eleanor was a devoted mother, a successful business owner, a widow who had miraculously found love again after tragedy. If only they knew the truth. If only they knew about the text messages I discovered on my father's phone after his funeral. If only they knew about the hotel receipts, the whispered phone calls, the unexplained absences while my father, Thomas Clark, was fighting for his life after his heart attack. "She's looking at you again," Ethan muttered, taking a large gulp of his champagne. I refused to meet my mother's gaze. I could feel her eyes on me throughout the evening, questioning, expectant, perhaps even hopeful. What did she expect? That I would suddenly forget everything and embrace Gregory as my new stepfather? That I would pretend the last 3 years hadn't happened? "Let her look," I said coldly. The evening dragged on interminably. I ordered another glass of wine, then another, hoping the alcohol would dull the sharp edges of my anger. It didn't. If anything, it only made the injustice of it all more pronounced. And then, just as I was contemplating a discreet exit, my mother clinked her glass with a silver spoon. The ballroom fell silent, all eyes turning toward the head table where she stood, radiant in her expensive gown, Gregory's hand resting possessively on her lower back. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "This is truly a special day for Gregory and me. We are blessed beyond measure to have such wonderful friends and family to share in our joy." Polite applause followed, and I took another large swallow of wine, the bitterness in my throat matching the bitterness in my heart. "Of course," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room, "I want to acknowledge my children, Ethan and Sophie." My muscles tensed involuntarily at the sound of my name. They've weathered so much these past few years, and I know how difficult transitions can be. Her voice softened, took on that public sympathy that made my skin crawl. Ethan, darling, you've been such a rock through all of this. Your strength has been my anchor. Ethan managed a tight-lipped smile, though I could see the discomfort written across his face. Then my mother's gaze landed squarely on me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "And Sophie," she said, her voice carrying a forced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Despite our differences, family is family. In the spirit of new beginnings, I'd love for you to say a few words." The room went still. I felt dozens of curious eyes turn to me, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribcage. Ethan's hand found mine under the table, a silent plea. "Don't do it," his touch seemed to say. But it was too late. "Come on, darling," my mother pressed when I didn't immediately stand. "Don't be ungrateful. Just a few words for your mother's special day." Ungrateful. The word sliced through me like a knife, igniting something primal and uncontrollable. I stood slowly, deliberately, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the hushed ballroom. I picked up my wine glass, holding it aloft. The room watched me, expectant. I took a deep breath, my decision already made. "Here's to the man who was sleeping with my mother while my father was dying." The words fell from my lips with devastating clarity. The effect was immediate. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped their fork with a clatter. Gregory's best friend, James, fumbled his champagne flute, sending it crashing to the floor in a spray of glass and sparkling wine. My mother's face drained of all color, her perfect makeup suddenly stark against her bloodless skin. "What?" she hissed, her voice barely audible over the growing murmurs. "Sophie," Gregory barked, half rising from his seat. I didn't flinch. "I'm not finished," I said, my voice steady now, fueled by 3 years of suppressed grief and rage. "I'd also like to toast to the text messages, the secret rendezvous, the perfectly timed business trips while Dad was in cardiac care." I raised my glass higher. "To lies well told and affairs well hidden." "That's enough." My mother's voice cut through the chaos, her composure cracking. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I challenged, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Because I remember Dad asking where you were when his medication wasn't working. I remember finding hotel receipts in your purse when I was looking for his insurance cards. I remember the cologne on your clothes that wasn't his." The minister who had officiated the ceremony stood up abruptly, removing his glasses. "I think I need some air," he announced to no one in particular, and, without another word, walked straight out of the ballroom. Gregory was on his feet now, his face contorted with fury. "You will not ruin this night for your mother." "Ruin it?" I laughed, the sound hollow and cold. "Mom, you ruined it. You ruined us. You ruined everything when you chose him over Dad. Over your family." "Get out," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "Get out now." I set my glass down carefully on the pristine tablecloth. "Gladly." Without another glance at the stunned faces around me, I walked out of the reception, my head held high despite the trembling in my limbs. Behind me, I could hear the whispers turning into full-blown conversations, the perfect wedding descending into beautiful chaos. The grand corridor outside the ballroom was mercifully quiet, lined with ornate mirrors that reflected back the image of a woman I barely recognized, chin lifted defiantly, eyes bright with unshed tears, cheeks flushed with emotion. I needed air. My hands shook as I pushed open the heavy doors leading to the hotel's terrace garden. The April night was cool against my heated skin, the distant sounds of Boston traffic a comforting reminder that life continued beyond the walls of that suffocating ballroom. I leaned against the stone balustrade, my fingers gripping the cold surface as I drew in deep, steadying breaths. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to my personal drama, and I found that oddly comforting. What had I done? Had I just burned every bridge with my remaining family? The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if speaking those words had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for too long. "Sophie." I turned at the sound of my brother's voice. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, I braced myself for his anger, his disappointment. Instead, he crossed the terrace and stood beside me, saying nothing. "Are you okay?" I finally asked, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the night. He let out a huffed laugh, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. "Am I okay? I should be asking you that." I shrugged, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know, Ethan. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not today." "You didn't," he said softly, so softly I almost missed it over the distant hum of traffic. "Believe me, you didn't." I glanced at him sideways. Was I out of line? Ethan barked out a short laugh. "Out of line? Sophie, you just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of Mom's wedding. Out of line doesn't quite cover it." I winced, but then noticed the slight upturn of his lips. "You're not mad." He sighed, leaning his elbows on the balustrade and gazing out at the city. "Would I have done it that way? Probably not. But am I mad?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not even a little bit." A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the muffled sounds of the reception continuing inside and the occasional car horn from the streets below. "Dad would have loved this, wouldn't he?" Ethan mused after a moment, his voice thick with emotion. I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think he would have." He nodded, blinking rapidly. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently, both of us finding strength in the simple gesture. "Are they still in there?" I asked eventually. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Oh yeah." Guests whispering, Mom doing damage control, but it's bad. He shot me a sidelong glance. Gregory looked like he was going to have an aneurysm, and the minister actually left. Like, completely walked out. A dry chuckle escaped me. "Good." My brother smirked. "Honestly?" "Yeah." The door behind us creaked open, and we both turned. There she was, Eleanor Matthews, now Eleanor Wilson, our mother. Her elegant updo was starting to come undone, tendrils of honey blonde hair framing a face tight with barely suppressed fury. Her perfectly manicured hands were clenched at her sides, the massive diamond on her ring finger catching the dim terrace light. "Ethan," she said, her voice controlled but strained. "Go inside." My brother stiffened beside me. "No." Her gaze flickered between us, landing finally on me. "This is between Sophie and me." I stepped forward, positioning myself slightly in front of Ethan. "He stays," I said firmly. Her nostrils flared, but she kept her voice even. "I don't want to do this here." "Oh, now you care about appearances?" I gestured toward the ballroom. "Pretty sure that ship sailed when you called me ungrateful in front of 200 people." Her jaw tightened visibly. "You humiliated me." I let out a humorless laugh. "You humiliated yourself, Mom. You could have just let me sit there quietly, but no, you had to drag me into your perfect fairy tale wedding." She took a step closer, her voice dropping. "You had no right to do what you did." I met her gaze unflinchingly. "And you had no right to do what you did to Dad." Her eyes darkened dangerously. "You don't understand." "Don't I?" I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. "Don't you dare try to justify it. I was there, Mom. I watched Dad wither away while you were with him." I jabbed a finger in the direction of the ballroom where Gregory undoubtedly waited. Ethan inhaled sharply beside me, but remained silent, his presence a steady source of strength. My mother exhaled slowly, as if trying to regain her composure. "You don't know what my marriage to your father was like." My blood turned to ice in my veins. "Excuse me?" Her expression hardened. "It wasn't perfect, Sophie. There were issues long before Gregory." I stared at her in disbelief. "You don't get to do that," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "You don't get to rewrite history just to make yourself feel better about what you did." "I was unhappy," she said simply, as if that explained everything. I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that scraped my throat raw. "You were unhappy?" I stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes that her expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. Dad was dying, Mom. He was scared and in pain, and he still clung to the belief that maybe, just maybe, you loved him enough to be there for him. And you were what, bored? Restless? Ready to move on before he was even gone? My mother's face contorted with something that might have been shame, but it passed so quickly I couldn't be sure. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, smoothed down the front of her wedding gown with trembling hands. "If you walk away from me now," she said, her voice cold and final, "you walk away for good. Is that what you want?" I felt Ethan tense beside me, but I never hesitated. This was at the moment she thought she could leverage maternal authority to force me back into compliance. But she had miscalculated. I'd already lost my father. Losing her, this version of her, at least didn't frighten me at all. I squared my shoulders and met her gaze with unwavering certainty. "If that's what it takes," I said steadily, "then yes, that's exactly what I want." Ethan made a small, surprised sound beside me, but he didn't try to intervene. My mother's expression didn't change. If anything, her features just hardened further, like clay left too long in the sun. "Then don't come crying back when you regret it," she said flatly. I shook my head slowly. "I won't." And with that, I turned and walked away. Ethan hesitated for only a second before following. We didn't look back, not once. The cool night air embraced us as we moved away from our mother, the weight of years of unspoken truths pressing down on us. My legs felt heavy, my breathing shallow, but I kept walking. My mother didn't call after us, didn't try to stop us. I hadn't expected her to. Eleanor Matthews, now Wilson, wasn't the type of woman to chase after anything she let go of. Ethan and I reached the side entrance of the hotel where a few staff members were huddled together, cigarettes glowing in the darkness. They barely glanced our way, likely too absorbed in whatever gossip was currently spreading through the hotel staff about the wedding drama unfolding inside. Ethan sniffled beside me, wrapping his arms around himself against the chill. "You okay?" I asked, my voice gentler now. He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Am I okay? Sophie, I don't even know what the hell just happened in there." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Do you realize what you just did?" I ran a hand through my carefully styled hair, undoubtedly ruining the updo that had cost me a small fortune at the hotel salon. "Yeah, I do." He searched my face, his eyes reflecting the streetlights. "And do you regret it?" I hesitated, but only for a second. "No," I said honestly. "Not even a little." Ethan exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yeah," he murmured. "Me neither." We stood there in silence, the sounds of distant traffic filling the space between us. Then Ethan laughed again, this time a real laugh, breathless and almost disbelieving. "Jesus Christ, Sophie." The minister walked out. I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at my lips. "Yeah, that was something." He shook his head, still grinning, but then his expression sobered. "What do we do now?" I exhaled heavily, tilting my head back to look at the night sky, barely visible through Boston's light pollution. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I'm not going back in there." Ethan bit his lip, glancing toward the hotel entrance where the sounds of muffled music and voices still drifted through the air. "Should we just leave?" I raised an eyebrow. "Should we stay?" He considered for a moment, then nodded. "Fair point." Just as we were about to head for the parking lot, the door swung open behind us. "Sophie." We turned. It was Gregory, his designer tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his bow tie askew as if he'd been tugging at it in frustration. His usually impeccable salt and pepper hair was slightly disheveled, his face flushed with what could only be rage. Ethan groaned quietly. "Oh, for God's sake." Gregory strode toward us, his expensive leather shoes clicking aggressively against the pavement. When he stopped, he was close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath. He jabbed a finger in my direction, stopping just short of actually touching me. "You ruined your mother's wedding," he snarled. I tilted my head slightly, regarding him with forced calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Did I?" Or did you both ruin your own lives when you decided to start an affair with a married woman whose husband was fighting for his life? His eyes flashed dangerously. You arrogant little. Careful, I warned, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Wouldn't want any more guests to hear the adoring groom having a meltdown in the parking lot. His face darkened further. You think this is funny? You think humiliating your mother in front of everyone was some kind of victory for you? I crossed my arms over my chest, suddenly acutely aware of the chill in the April air. I think it was the truth, I said simply. Something neither of you seemed to be familiar with. Gregory's nostrils flared. You selfish, spoiled brat. Ethan stepped forward then, his body language shifting from passive observer to protective brother in an instant. Back off, he warned, his voice low. Gregory ignored him, focusing his fury entirely on me. Your mother gave you everything, he hissed. She sacrificed for you, built a life for you, and this is how you repay her? I drew in a slow, deliberate breath, fighting to maintain my composure. You want to talk about repayment, Gregory? My father spent 30 years loving a woman who betrayed him while he was fighting heart failure. I gestured at him dismissively. And you were part of it. You don't get to stand here in your $1,000 tuxedo and play the victim. His mouth opened and closed, temporarily speechless. Ethan let out a quiet damn beside me. Gregory recovered quickly. Your mother doesn't deserve this. She's been through enough. I felt something snap inside me, the last tether of restraint breaking free. She's been through enough? My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. Do you hear yourself? My father died, and you think she was the one who suffered. Gregory's face contorted with barely contained rage. Thomas. Don't say his name. I cut him off sharply, stepping forward until we were inches apart. He hesitated, something flickering across his face, perhaps the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all night. You don't get to pretend you cared about him, I said, my voice deadly calm despite the storm raging inside me. You don't get to act like this wedding is some beautiful new beginning when we all know what it really is. Gregory swallowed hard, his jaw working visibly as he struggled to maintain his composure. You're just another chapter in a book of lies, I said, each word precisely delivered. And someday, when someone newer and more exciting comes along, she'll do to you exactly what she did to Dad. For the first time that night, Gregory had nothing to say. His face had paled considerably, my words striking a nerve he hadn't expected to be exposed. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Are we done here? He asked, not bothering to hide the disdain in his voice. Gregory's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without another word, he spun on his heel and marched back toward the hotel. Wow, Ethan muttered once Gregory was out of earshot. That was... He trailed off, searching for the right word. Exhausting, I supplied, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening pressing down on me. He studied my face. Are you really okay? I hesitated, acknowledging the truth for perhaps the first time that night. I don't know, I admitted, but I think I will be. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Then, unexpectedly, a mischievous smile spread across his face. So, since we're already dressed up and out in the city, he gestured to his suit and my formal dress. Want to go find some overpriced cocktails somewhere pretentious and act like we belong there? A small smile tugged at my lips despite everything. That might be the best idea you've had all night. Ethan looped his arm through mine. Then let's get the hell out of here. And with that, we walked away from the Grand Plaza Hotel, leaving the wreckage of my mother's wedding behind us. For the first time in a long time, I felt something akin to freedom, a lifting of a burden I'd carried for far too long. The night air seemed fresher somehow, the city lights brighter. Ethan and I walked down the bustling Boston street, the familiar sounds of the city wrapping around us like a comfortable blanket. Despite the chill, I felt warmer than I had in years later, as if speaking my truth had finally unlocked something vital inside me. You going to be okay? Ethan asked, his arm still linked with mine. I drew in a deep breath, letting it out slowly. I think so. I glanced at him. You. He shrugged, but there was a new lightness in his movements. Honestly, I thought I'd feel terrible. I thought I'd be panicking about how we just completely demolished Mom's big day. He paused, then broke into an unexpected grin. But I feel amazing. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound that surprised even me. Good. We ended up at a swanky cocktail lounge in Back Bay, an upscale establishment filled with Boston's elite in designer clothes and perfect hair. We absolutely did not belong there with our wedding attire now slightly rumpled from our dramatic exit, but Ethan was determined, and I figured after what we'd just been through, we deserved something ridiculously expensive and potent. We slid into a leather booth near the back, ordered 2 elaborately named cocktails we couldn't really afford, and let the night settle around us. The soft jazz playing in the background and the gentle murmur of sophisticated conversation created a surreal contrast to the chaos we'd left behind. "You know she's going to come after us, right?" Ethan said after a while, stirring his martini with the tiny plastic sword that held 3 olives. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my own drink, something with bourbon and bitters that burned pleasantly down my throat. "Yeah, but I don't care." He smirked, raising his glass in a small toast. "So what's next?" I contemplated the amber liquid in my glass, watching the way it caught the light. "We finish what we started." And that's exactly what we did. By the next morning, my mother's wedding had gone viral. Ethan and I woke to our phones exploding with notifications, texts, missed calls, social media alerts. The scandal had spread like wildfire through Boston's upper-class social circles and beyond. Apparently, several guests had recorded my impromptu toast. Someone had posted it online, and then the internet did what the internet does best: it took our family drama and turned it into public entertainment. The video was everywhere. Bride's daughter exposes affair at Boston society wedding, corporate lawyer's wedding turns into public meltdown, brutal wedding toast calls out mother's infidelity, and we're here for it. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee when he showed me the headlines on his laptop screen. "Holy crap, Sophie, we broke the internet." I scrolled through the comments on one of the videos, a strange mix of vindication and disbelief washing over me. "Justice for Thomas." Imagine being called out like this on your wedding day. Couldn't be me. Low-key, the minister walking out was the most iconic part. You love to see karma working in real time. I couldn't help but laugh, the absurdity of it all finally hitting me. The world had seen my mother and Gregory for who they really were. "Think Mom's seen it yet?" Ethan mused, still scrolling through various social media platforms. As if on cue, my phone lit up with an incoming call, Eleanor Matthews. I showed the screen to Ethan and let it ring. He raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to answer?" I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. "Nope. Cold," he grinned. "I like it." But I wasn't done yet. Over the next few days, my mother's carefully constructed image began to crumble. Her event planning business, which catered to Boston's elite and prided itself on discretion and taste, was not happy about the scandal. Clients started canceling contracts, not wanting to be associated with the drama. Then more rumors started surfacing. People began digging former employees, old family friends, distant acquaintances. Turned out Gregory wasn't the only affair. There were others, multiple indiscretions, some of them years before Dad's heart problems even started. Ethan and I didn't have to do anything. The internet did the work for us. A week later, my mother temporarily closed her business, citing personal reasons. A week after that, Gregory was conspicuously absent from her carefully curated social media posts. Then finally, the cherry on top, Gregory left her. He couldn't handle the humiliation, the constant whispers, the damage to his professional reputation. He had signed up for wealth, status, a trophy wife to complete his perfect corporate image. He hadn't signed up for being that guy from the viral wedding scandal. And so, just 2 months after their disastrous wedding, he packed his things and moved out of the Beacon Hill townhouse they had purchased together. Poetic justice indeed. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan and I visited our father's grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery. It was peaceful there, quiet, with maple trees blazing red and gold in the fall sunlight. I placed a bouquet of fresh daisies, his favorite, beside his headstone, brushing away fallen leaves from the cool marble surface. "Hey, Dad," I murmured, tracing the engraved letters of his name with my fingertips. "You won't believe what we did." Ethan chuckled softly, kneeling beside me on the freshly cut grass. "You would have loved it." I drew in a deep breath, staring at the dates carved in stone that encompass my father's too short life. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe properly, like we had finally given him the justice he never received when he was alive. I didn't regret a single thing. Eleanor reached out once, a pathetic, half-hearted voicemail. "Sophie, I know things got out of hand, but you're still my daughter. We should talk." I deleted it without listening to the rest. Ethan and I moved on with our lives. I returned to Chicago, throwing myself into my work at the museum with renewed passion. Ethan went back to his software development job in New York, but we talked almost daily now, our shared experience having forged a bond stronger than either of us had anticipated. And my mother? Last I heard, she was living alone in her townhouse, her reputation in tatters, her business struggling to recover, her social standing irreparably damaged. And honestly, that was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. For the first time in my life, I was truly free from the weight of unexpressed truths and unacknowledged grief, and that, more than anything, was enough.